peoples have ceremony throughout the year for planting, honoring, and harvesting foods and their crops. Food in of itself is spiritual. When we mention healing foods, we mention certain foods that are good for our mind, body, and spirit. Certain foods brighten our spirit, of course, and many of us pray before we eat and thank God and the Creator for the food. I'd like to touch a little bit on human rights. Having access and availability to healthful and adequate levels of food is a human right. Food security is also a human right. Based on the 1996 World Food Summit, food security is defined when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. According to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, food security has 4 characteristics. Healthy, safe, and nutritious food is available in quantities adequate to the needs of persons and communities. Local access to food exists at an affordable cost, and food is utilized in a manner that maximizes its nutritional value. And the food system meets the needs of persons and communities, not commodities, consistently over time. And I'd like to read an article from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his or her control. Now, under the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which I, of course, fight for, of the United Nations, and preach when I can, under Article 20, Indigenous peoples have a right to maintain and develop their political, economic, and social systems or institutions to be secure in the enjoyment of their own means of subsistence and development, and to engage freely in all their traditional or other economic activities. In other words, we have the right to determine who we are, be who we are, live, and practice our life and our cultures in Indigenous peoples. Now I wanted to add too, what can we add to the new Farm Bill? And this is just my thoughts. We can add the Clean Water Act, which I think is very important. We can add the Clean Air Act. We can address, of course, food insecurity in the Farm Bill, sorry. We can add a holistic approach on how we approach dealing with the Farm Bill titles. Add equitable access and consideration to food and agriculture. We can eliminate chemicals and pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides such as PFAS. We need to look at eliminating those forever chemicals from our agriculture, food, and including our animals. We need to develop systems and programs that address food waste, where all foods are used and provided to all levels of society. This would include restaurants where unused food is distributed, food banks, or similar. We can look at sustainable methodologies of farming and agriculture, which should be implemented that it would include water conservation methods and water product diversification. We can limit the use of fossil fuels and chemicals determined to be harmful to people and the environment. And a lot of my work on an environmental level includes, addressing fracking issues and uranium mining issues, and so those are things we should probably take a look at in helping to protect our farmlands and our agriculture from those threats to our people and our lives, and also protect our farmers and their lands. We really need to think about that as part of this Farm Bill, because I think that insecurity to farmers is a hindrance to more farming. I mean, Alan talked about how there was lands up north where only 4,000, 8,000 acres were being used. That's a real inadequate solution to addressing our food insecurity. where we should make it viable to live and survive being a farmer. You know, they should have protections and not be afraid of losing their land, you know, down the road from the government or whatever entity may be threatening them. And also we need to think about addressing climate change when it comes to farming and this farm bill. We need to consider and research responses to severe weather changes, like severe drought, which we have here currently in New Mexico. We need to consider harsh cold winter conditions, floods, hurricanes, and severe rain on how to protect those susceptible to those weather conditions and or changes. Look at the types of crops, products, you know, planting methodologies, on where would be best served for the types of crops that can deal in hot weather or in cold weather or in very wet weather. You know, look at those viable aspects and ways to address that by managing and distributing all those crops in that way. And you know, they can be moved to more favorable regions, you know, shuttle crops around those regions where they can survive. So we got to get real unique and theoretical on how we can approach, you know, farming techniques and methodologies. And climate change must also be assessed for real impacts, you know, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Look at their report and its assessments on the science related to climate change. In addition, consider the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which are the 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. I'll read a few of those, like SDG 2, which addresses zero hunger. SDG 3, which is good health and well-being. SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. As an accredited member of the United Nations, I actually worked on the SDGs back in 2014 and 15. And so it's been an incredible journey to see it unfold and begin to take hold around the world. And it's beginning finally to take hold here in the United States. And I applaud Canada for really taking grasp of the SDGs. I presented several years ago in Canada and talked about the indigenous people's input in creation of the SDGs. And to be there and have like ministers of education and agriculture, interior, there to be sitting in the same room with us talking about the SDGs was incredible. And it seemed like they were so far ahead of the United States on addressing those sustainable development goals. So I'm glad to see that we're finally getting on board with that here in the United States. And also I want to touch base too on indigenous ways of farming. The Hopi use a methodology of tiered levels of farming, you know, for their fields, where water can be applied to an upper level field to where the water will trickle down to the lower fields as it's being drained into the land. In addition, some of the farms were actually developed and created in canyons so that, you know, during the summer the heat won't destroy the plants or really affect the plants in severe heat. So that's how they also address their farming issues in the Hopi. If you ever visit the Hopi lands, it's arid, rocky, it's dry, and it's hot. And it gets really cold in the summer too, so it's really a harsh environment. So we really need to look at indigenous ways of farming and how they sustain their way of life in agriculture, because they've been practicing sustainable development in agriculture for millennia, thousands of years. So there is an effort now to really address, by the United States, looking at indigenous ways of science and agriculture, etc. So those are really beginning to take place, and I look forward to hearing more about what becomes of that. And then we also look at, you know, we think about food sovereignty. You know, tribes actually maintain seed banks. You know, they have seed banks for almost every tribe of their type of agriculture and crops that they plant on their lands. One seed bank that I know of that is very historical is at Okayawenge, Pueblo. It's actually designed and built kind of underground, so it stays cool and protects the seed throughout the year. And it's my understanding they have hundreds of thousands of seeds dating back to thousands of years that they can bring out and plant as necessary. And just recently, I attended an event at Santa Ana Pueblo, and what they mentioned to us is that they were rehabilitating one of their kivas, and there was a mythical seed that was supposedly inputted into the kiva when it was built, from thousands of years, hundreds of years ago. And when they were rehabilitating, they actually found the seed that was there, that was mythical. So that was pretty interesting that they found that. And then lastly, I want to touch base on legislative protections for farming and agriculture. There's one movement that I'm working on, which is the Green Amendment, which is a national movement to influence and where necessary change the state's constitution in the Bill of Rights to recognize our right to clean air, land, and water, and a healthful environment, which to me is a no-brainer why we don't have that anyway. So we are working. We've got 4 states that have passed a new Green Amendment to their state's constitution. Mexico, hopefully we'll get there. We are working on a Mexico to change our Bill of Rights. And again, let's protect Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, so much for also really deepening our understanding of how tribal communities and indigenous communities can really help us learn as a broader community here in New Mexico. And I think Clarence, you and Alan have touched on that as well. And a few things that you brought up that I think are important for us, like you said, climate change is here. We're experiencing. This is, as we lean into this farm bill, this is our chance, our time to really focus on water issues, land issues, and then how they relate to being able to protect them. And what a lot of people might not know is one of the bigger issues for this farm bill is land ownership. There are corporations around the country, not only in this country, but outside this country, that are buying up farmland. Bill Gates is one of those people who's bought up a lot of farmland in the Mississippi area and is leasing it out to farmers without a lot of parameters on how that's used, and certainly nothing that has, I think, the kinds of things that Terry, you're bringing up, which is caring for that land and water, the environmental issues around that. So we need to take that into consideration, because that kind of ownership means power and it means control. Right? And as we're talking about it, we really want that, I'm going to say it, power and control at the local level by individuals and families and communities to care for how our food is nurtured, grown, and then moved into our community. Like Alan was talking about, the many ways we can do it at the very local level, right, through these resources. So